Ralph, for putting this together. I'm Dr. Josh Bondi. I'm the Director of Research at the Nevada Science Center, and I'm here with co-founder and Director of Education, Becky Hall.
Hi, I hope everyone's doing well today. So we're on the north end of the Las Vegas Valley, about 15 miles north of the famous Las Vegas Strip, if you're not from Nevada, at Tule Springs Fossil Beds National Monument. Here we're going to be talking a little bit about Ice Age animals that lived in Nevada, and not just in Nevada, across the Northern Hemisphere, and how they differed from the animals that lived here versus other places. So I guess, what should we start with? Oh, I do want to say one thing though before we get started. So we are in a remote location. So if we do cut out for a minute, stay calm, stay logged in. We'll be right back. It's just the internet catching up. It's just the problems that come with being on live in remote areas of Nevada desert.
Right.
All right, Josh, I'll let you get started. Why don't you talk about why are animals here, or why is Tule Springs National Monument here?
All right, so let's start with why Tule Springs Fossil Beds National Monument is here and an adjacent Ice Age Fossil State Park. So the reason that this area here in Southern Nevada is so significant is that ever since the early 1900s, fossils were discovered here. And then later on in the early 1900s, some human artifacts were also discovered. So with the early advent of radiocarbon dating, archaeologists and geologists and paleontologists were trying to figure out whether or not early North Americans were interacting with some of the animals we're going to talk about here in a little bit, in particular, whether or not they were hunting them. And so this part of the Las Vegas Valley was identified because Ice Age animals have been found here, artifacts have been found here, but maybe this would be the spot that we would find that smoking gun of people having hunted or interacted with these Ice Age animals. And so in the 1960s, what was termed the Big Dig here locally came out to where Ice Age Fossil State Park is today, and they dug these great big trenches trying to figure out the geology of the area and also trying to figure out where the artifacts were, where the fossils were, and whether or not those interacted with each other. Unfortunately, archaeologically, it was a failure. So this big dig, this big multidisciplinary study, the biggest of its time, didn't find what they were looking for. But a ton of really great science was done. So the pollen of the area was worked on. The fossils have been studied for the last century. And there were artifacts found. They just weren't found in association with animals.
How long ago did the park come here? How about a little bit of that?
That's right. So the Tule Springs Fossil Beds National Monument was advocated for through the early 2000s and was designated by Congress in the mid part of the last decade. So it's about 23,000 acres on the north end of the Las Vegas Valley. You can probably hear a jet zipping over our heads right now. It's a flyway also between two Air Force bases in the area, Nellis Air Force Base to Creech Air Force Base. So if you can't hear me for a minute, we'll wait for the jets to go over. That's just, again, part of live broadcast. And being where we're at.
You guys are all good, though. We can still hear you guys.
Okay, excellent. So a group called Protectors of Tule Springs, some other local advocates, worked together for the designation of this area, which was previously Bureau of Land Management administered land, to become a new national park unit. And so, again, this is now a national monument. The adjacent state park is Ice Age Fossil State Park, where the original 1960s dig occurred.
Oh, and actually the jets are important too, because that was a factor in dedicating it as a monument, right? Because it's a fly zone now.
Yeah, so the United States Air Force was actually one of the advocates for this becoming a national park.
Right, so it gives them free space to go fly their jets across. So Tule Springs, the national monument, and also the state park, the sediment here, or the rocks that are found here, are really important, not just for preserving the fossils, but also like for us discovering them thousands of years later. So talk a little bit about the geology. So there is a fault that runs right through Las Vegas. And this fault allows water to be pushed up in as springs. So back 20,000 years ago, it wasn't as dry like the Mojave Desert today. It was cooler, like the Ice Age, not the glaciers, a lot cooler, a little bit more moisture, and we had these springs that brought animals together as a watering. not only did they come here, but there was the sediment also allowed it to be preserved. So you want to talk about that?
The sediments.
Yeah.
So work that was done by former researchers at the San Bernardino County Museum over in Southern California, who subsequently moved on to other posts, have worked out that the sediments behind us range over the last two ice ages. And so we have sediments that range from about over 100,000 years ago to almost recent. And so, like Becky said, the springs come and go with the ice ages, and animals come and go with the water. And so we're actually looking at the history of the Las Vegas Valley in the individual layers that are found behind us. We're talking about these tannish and buff colored beds. In the distance, that's the Las Vegas and Sheep Ranges, where much more ancient Paleozoic age rocks and marine fossils are found, which are a whole different story, but we could talk about some other time.
So getting to the animals. So they have discovered a lot of really cool animals here and a lot of fossils. So we'll get started first with talking about one of the largest animals that are found here. And that would be the Columbian mammoth. So we're going to send it back to Ralph because we actually took a video from our lab yesterday of one of these tusks that we have in our lab today. So Ralph, why don't you cut to the video real quick and we'll come back to the mammoth.
Hey, welcome back to our lab at the Nevada Science Center here in downtown Henderson. So even though today we're talking about ice age animals out in the Tule Springs fossil beds areas, we thought we'd bring you back to the lab for a special guest we have. So this is actually one of the mammoth tusks that was excavated out at Tule Springs on Bureau of Land Management administered lands. This tusk measures about 8 feet long from the very tip to the very base of it. So this tusk weighs about 400 pounds in its plaster jacket that's held it together for all the years since it was excavated. It's from a Columbian mammoth, which is the largest elephants that we had in all of North America during the Ice Age. Now, that brings us to another topic. There were actually 3 different types of elephant-like animals that lived in North America during the last Ice Age, or the Pleistocene. So the first one, which we're talking about here in Nevada, so Columbian mammoths have been found from the Black Rock Desert all the way down here to the Las Vegas Valley. They could stand anywhere between 16 and 18 feet tall, the very tallest at their shoulders. So these were bigger than any living elephants that we have today. And then their long, sweeping tusks. Our little educational prop here has hair depicted on this animal, but we've never actually found hide of them, and so we don't actually know if they had hair. More likely than not, their closest living relatives are Asian elephants, which don't have hair, so they were probably just big, hairless elephants. So grazing across the landscapes of Nevada up until about 10,000 years ago. Now that's in comparison to the woolly mammoth. Again, our educational props are not to scale. Woolly mammoths are actually relatively smaller than Columbian mammoths. So woolly mammoths stood about 10 to 12 feet tall at the shoulder. So they are about the size of an Asian elephant. They have been found frozen in permafrost, so we do know that they had shaggy fur on them for living in more cold environments. We've never found a woolly mammoth in Nevada. Typically where we find woolly mammoths are around the Great Lakes regions and up in the northwestern part of the United States. So these were more adapted to cold weather, and the long sweeping tusks coming straight down, some paleontologists hypothesized that was for clearing snow off of the grass. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but it's an interesting hypothesis. Then our third elephant is a distant cousin of true elephants, and that's the mastodon. So mastodons, their ancestors actually come over to North America about 20 million years ago, whereas Columbian mammoths and their ancestors come over about 2.5 million years ago. So mastodons actually lived in North America for much longer than mammoths did. Their teeth are more similar to ours, and so they have baby teeth and adult teeth that all kind of did similar things like most mammals do. Elephants and mammoths have really specialized teeth. Mastodons live into the Ice Age in North America, but typically in wooded environments. And there's only been one Ice Age mastodon found in the entire state of Nevada, and that was up in Elko County, which receives more precipitation today than anywhere, say, in the Black Rock Desert or the Las Vegas Valley. So it was a more wooded area of the state, and so it makes sense that we'd have mastodons in Elko and then mammoths in places like Reno and Las Vegas, just because it's more forested. So we can actually see the ecological differences between these elephant-like animals that were stomping around up until about 10,000 years ago here in Nevada.
Thank you, Ralph. So hopefully you got to see the mammoth tusk. I'm going to kind of touch back on what Josh mentioned in the lab is the teeth. So we got these 3D printed from Dr. Bernard Means from the virtual curation lab. So what he does is he scans fossils and he can print them out 3D, and he mailed us a couple. So you can see these two teeth. Let's see if I can, sorry, opposite. They look very different. This one is from a mastodon and this one's from a mammoth. So you see the chewing surface of the mammoth, and this would have been the mastodon. So their teeth were very different. So a few other animals that lived here in the fossils discovered here in Las Vegas. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the Las Vegas Formation, which is the rock, the name of the rocks behind us, you know, we're in the Las Vegas Valley, so why not the Las Vegas Formation? So the animals that have been found is essentially every single native animal that is running around southern Nevada today has been found also in Ice Age sediments out here. Coyotes, jackrabbits, cottontails, vultures, ground squirrels, you name it. If you see it in the landscape today, it was probably here during the Ice Age as well. But some interesting Ice Age additions to the fauna. The Columbian mammoths would have been certainly the largest animals walking around the landscape, but alongside them would have been camels. So there were herds of camels making their way across the Mojave Desert during this period of time. Herds of llamas, herds of horses also making their way through here. And then there's some recent studies on the interrelationships of different species of Ice Age bison. Using the old taxonomy, there's two species of bison that have been found here. So there's bison antiquus, which is like a modern bison except bigger and stouter. And then there's bison latifrons, which is the biggest species of bison that we have a record of, which would be like the Texas longhorn of bison, that great big long horn cores that would have been pretty impressive stomping around this landscape also. And then hunting all of these animals, so all of the plant eaters would have been animals like saber-toothed cats, which were discovered by the San Bernardino County Museum, packs of dire wolves, American lions were some of the first predators that were Ice Age predators that were found here. Just a side note, American lions were bigger than even modern African lions. So great big cats stalking the marshlands that would have been here in southern Nevada up until just a couple thousand years ago.
Should we share some of our toys with them?
Sure, let's go right ahead.
All right. How about, they always have to make them look mean. So here's a depiction of a dire wolf, right? They were much larger than the wolf. And you want to...
I think we're having some technical difficulties. Oh, there you guys are. We hear you now. We hear you now.
So this is a 3D print that was made by Dr. Bernard Means of the Virtual Curation Lab at Virginia Commonwealth University. And this is a 3D print of one of the first direwolf bones that was discovered here in southern Nevada. So even though these are the most common predators found at, say, Rancho La Brea, which is a famous Ice Age deposit, we don't find too many predator bones here. Yeah, this is a knuckle bone from this big dog. We don't find too many predator fossils here. But if you think of a modern ecosystem, there's always a lot more plant eaters than there are meat eaters. So in that regards, it makes sense here that we'd find a lot more plant eaters than meat eaters.
Here's one of the cutest plant eaters, my opinion. The giant ground sloth. So scientists know what ground sloths ate kind of a interesting way. So here in Nevada, we have old caves. And within these old caves was left behind. You want to talk about it?
Sure. This is another present from Dr. Means at the Virginia Commonwealth University. This is a 3D printed piece of ground sloth poop that he scanned from the Smithsonian Institution. So he went into their collections, and like Becky said, in these caves there are lots of mummified sloth poop. These giant ground sloths seem to have enjoyed caves, living in caves. And so scientists years ago picked apart what was in the poop, and it turns out they liked lots of the current vegetation that we see around the landscape here today. So like globe mallows, if you live in southern Nevada or in central Nevada, these are the plants that have orange flowers along the roadways. They like yucca flowers, And so I don't think we have any yuccas in the background here right now,
It's in the far background.
but
I don't
yeah,
see flowers, but yeah.
common pointy plants. So they seem to like these types of plants that are still growing around today. Giant ground sloths enjoyed eating them, not just enjoyed looking at them.
So the most common fossil probably found out here are what, between horses and camels?
Horses and camels.
So camels, a lot of people don't know that camels originated in North America. So we also have a lot of camel bones and fossils coming out of the Tule Springs area too. And then coming back to horses, if anyone's watched the news or read anything, recently there was homeowners who were digging their pool. Their property is near the north end of the valley by Tule Springs, and they came upon some bones. So we're doing some investigating, helping the homeowners kind of determine if this is a fossil or a modern horse. So it's a little bit unique, but they let us hold on to a couple things. So here are some bones of some teeth, right? Teeth, sorry. So the teeth can help us determine what kind of horse it was, and they can also help us determine if it was an Ice Age horse or if it was a more recent horse. So science is a lot slower than a big, quick news report. So right now, we still have to look at this specimen. It's still on the ground, but we'll be examining it more closely. And Josh mentioned it before, it's ways you can age or date a fossil. For Ice Age fossils, we use radiocarbon dating. And you send a little piece of organic material to the lab where they can determine how long ago that animal died. So we're still waiting on science of that, but we want everyone to know that we're super enthused about it too. It's a unique, different thing. So who wants to find fossils in their backyard? I think everyone does. So I want everyone to stay tuned to the Nevada Science Center for updates on that science project as well. Wrap up with anything?
I think that's good. Yeah. If you just want to follow along with whatever other science projects we're working on through the Nevada Science Center, you can watch our social media platforms or our website.
Yeah. So we want to shoot it back to you, Ralph. Take any
Absolutely.
questions about Tule Springs or being a paleontologist or anything you have on your mind.
Absolutely. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can with the amount of time because we want to be respectful of all the teacher schedules. One of the very first questions comes from us from Paradise Elementary, and they want to know how many fossils have been discovered in Tule Springs, give or take.
Before I got involved with this project about 10 years ago, the current count of fossil sites at the time was well over 600. A fossil site could be anything from a little scrap of bone to pieces of a whole mammoth. So I would say is probably in the tens of thousands. Again, that ranges from little, what some people call insignificant scraps, all the way up to the mammoth tusk you saw in the lab just a few moments ago.
And I'll add into that, they're still finding sites today. And that's actually a really good reminder right now that if you come to these parks, either in the National Monument or the state park, and you're hiking on a trail and you find a fossil, do not touch it. It's part of the park. It's a resource. It's important. If you touch it, they're really, really fragile, so they could break apart and they can lose their scientific integrity. So what you want to do if you find a fossil on parkland or out, you want to notify the park right away. Take a picture, take a GPS, and either if there's a ranger around, or you can find email addresses online on their websites, make sure you notify if you find a fossils, because those are still being discovered today.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have another question. One of the students would like to know, besides horses and you showed a tusk earlier and sloths, what other animals have you guys found out there in Tule Springs?
Yeah, so the laundry list. So there's been pondfish discovered out here, frog fossils, lizards.
I should say, come closer. The planes are about to take.
Yeah, we got more jets getting ready to come over. So we have lizards, snakes, ground squirrels, like I mentioned earlier, jackrabbits, cottontails, bobcats, coyotes, mountain lions, saber-toothed cats, American lions, dire wolves, camels, horses, llamas. So essentially almost every North American Ice Age animal, with the exception of two that are of particular interest to me as a Nevadan, is to my knowledge, there's been no giant short-faced bears found yet, which were an enormous species of bear from the Ice Age. It's been found in other parts of Nevada, or American cheetahs. So American cheetahs are really rare, but we haven't found those here yet. It's just a matter of time, I hope.
So we have a question from one of our elementary school students, and this is a two-part question because we have multiple kids asking this. First of all, what kind of tools do you guys use in your work? Second, how long does it take to actually excavate an animal?
Well, we came prepared because I feel like that is a common question. So for tools, so we only brought these tools out today to show you because we knew we got these questions. But when you are on a national park, we would not be bringing tools with us. So this is a trowel. So this can gently remove dirt from the surface, kind of scrape it around. So if we saw a bone sticking out of the surface, we could move dirt carefully around it. We also have paintbrushes. This is probably our number one tool to start off with. Just brushing the bones off to get a better idea. An awl. So poking at it, you can, click it, clink it, poke around. Toilet paper can be used for a couple things when you're out in the desert, but fossils are very fragile. So we'll wrap them up in toilet paper if we were on a dig site where we were going to be excavating.
And about how long does it take, would you say on average, to excavate some of these animals?
So it could take a day to weeks, depending on if there's a plaster jacket needed, how fragile, how exposed, how big. It really depends. There's not one of the always the same. It's always different, and there's always a surprise.
So
those are main tools.
Some of the kids are asking, can you talk where you guys are at right now? Was it once underwater?
So where we're standing right now is where it would have been kind of marshy. So all these sediments behind us are from periods of time where water was either a part of the landscape. It was never super deep water. I know lots of people like to say Nevada used to be underwater and there was ichthyosaurs swimming around. That's true hundreds of millions of years ago. But over the last couple tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years ago, the Las Vegas Valley has looked relatively the same as it does today, with the exception that we had these marshes on the north end of the valley. So it wasn't underwater, but there was more water on the landscape.
Right. And we'd have all these springs coming up too.
And do you guys ever find stones and crystals and geodes or anything like that?
Not out here. I've never seen geodes or crystals or anything like that.
I mean, sometimes we can get minerals, right? So gypsum is an evaporite, like calcite. So there are certain minerals that we can find in these type of sediments, but there's also rocks that come in from the mountains. So we have a lot of limestone that washes in. So if you're a rock hounder, collect rocks again on the park, even if it's not a fossil, no rocks at the park. But there's plenty of places around the valley, around the mountains that you can go collect your own rocks for your collection.
Sure, and we'll go with a couple more questions before we let you guys go. One of the students wants to know what's the smallest and biggest fossil. I know you showed us the biggest one already, but what's the smallest fossil that you guys have ever found?
The smallest fossils that I've been a part of finding, I wasn't the one that actually processed them, but there's these little teeny tiny round bones that are in the ears of fish. And so we've actually been able to process those back in the lab. And so we've got little vials full of these little circles called otoliths, which are just fish ear bones.
That
I know that's not super exciting, but
no, that's incredible. I wasn't aware. I was like kind of like thinking, I was like, wow, yeah, that checks out. Like, how would I even know that? One of the last questions we'll ask you today is how can you guys determine which fossils are which animal and which of those animals were in the Ice Age?
So it's comparative anatomy, right? So we have animals that live today that lived in the Ice Age. So we're not talking dinosaurs, so those are kind of hard because they're not around. There's a lot of animals within the same families. So even though we don't have mammoths around, we still have elephants around. So we can still study their bones. It's called comparative anatomy because you're comparing the bones, right? So you're comparing what they look like, the shape of them, to bones that you already know and identify. As far as the age go, for Ice Age animals, it'd be radiocarbon dating. So you would be taking samples of the actual bone, sending them to a lab where they measure the half-life of carbon to determine the age or when the animal died. If it's older than Ice Age animals, you also would date the rock that it's found in. So there's a scientific process that we go through. And that's what I was saying with the horse. We haven't concluded on the horse yet because there's a huge scientific process that we have to go through.
That's a lot going on there with science. One of the final questions, one of the kids wants to know, what's the rarest fossil that you've ever found?
Rarest fossil, I'll get closer since the got more jets coming over. Yeah, probably the rarest fossils are going to be the carnivore fossils. And for our team in particular, probably the rarest fossil out here that we've personally discovered was that little direwolf knuckle. And so that was some of the first evidence that we had that direwolves even lived in the entirety of the state of Nevada.
That's incredible. And before we let you go, first of all, can you guys tell anyone who's interested, where can they go to learn more about everything you guys are doing over at the Nevada Science Center?
So you can always check us out on our website, sciencecenternevada.org. We have updated calendar information on how to contact us or get in touch with our associate researchers. You can also email us, info@nvscicenter.org. Yeah, social media, definitely social media. We always are posting on social media, trying to get everyone aware of what's going on. And anything else?
I think that's it.
No, we're always open for questions. So yes, please send us your emails.
And the final remarks, if you guys could, because we have a lot of students who are interested in becoming paleontologists. What kind of advice would you have for those kids who want to follow your career paths?
My advice always is to read. So it used to be you had to go to the library to read, but now it's all at our fingertips. So find subjects in paleontology that are interesting to you and read as much as you can. Once you get old enough, go offer to volunteer at your local museum, science center, university, and get some practical experience under your belt. And you'll either figure out you really love it or maybe it's not your cup of tea. Either way, it'll help serve you moving forward.
And I'll have to say, I mean, gosh, but one last thing is the never stop exploring. Go out and explore your surroundings. Have a better understanding. Have your own rock collection. Explore the natural world. I think that's a very important piece of it.